This week on the Men at the Movies podcast, we continue the Lord of the Rings trilogy with The Two Towers. How do you maintain hope in the face of growing darkness? What voice do you listen to, the voice of accusation or of invitation? And what mark do you want to leave on the world? Join us as we discover our stories in this movie.
The movies and stories we love are gateways to see ourselves and God in new ways.
Every great story borrows its power from a larger story, the story that's written on our hearts and woven into the fabric of our very being.
I wonder if we'll ever be put into songs or tales.
What?
I wonder if people will ever say, let's hear about Frodo and the Ring. And they'll say, yes, it's one of my favorite stories. Frodo was really courageous, wasn't he, Dad? Yes, my boy. The most famousest of hobbits. And that's saying a lot.
You've left out one of the chief characters. Samwise the Brave. I want to hear more about Sam.
Frodo wouldn't have got far without Sam. Now, Mr. Frodo, you shouldn't make fun. I was being serious. So was I. Samwise the Brave.
Hello and welcome to the Men at the Movies podcast. My name is Paul McDonald, and joining me here on part 2 of our Lord of the Rings series for book/movie 2 is Jay Heck. How you doing today, man?
Hey, man, I am great. What a movie. Woo!
Yeah, this was, I normally don't put a clip there, but it just seemed to be the way to go because, and even it's one from the end. Like those may be the last words from the movie, but I think that starting at the end is a good place to start because this one goes pretty dark.
Yeah.
And it starts pretty dark. It starts, we see Gandalf falling and Frodo wakes up and then we see Saruman. And so it goes dark places. And we're going to talk about going dark places. And we're going to talk really a lot about how do we maintain hope in the midst of the battle, in midst of overwhelming odds and all that stuff. And so one of the pieces that I liked about that was that end where Frodo and Sam are walking. And as we just heard, Frodo says, Frodo wouldn't have made it far without Sam the Brave. And Sam kind of shrugs it off. He's like, don't be joking around. He's like, no, I'm serious. And then he accepts it. He's like, oh yeah, I am Sam the Brave, which is going to get him through what's coming up next in the final movie there. And normally we'd start off with why did we pick this movie? But we did that last time and it's really just one big story. And so Jay wanted to ask, as you think about this movie, what themes have you seen? What themes did you really grasp as kind of jumping out at you? And honestly, this is one of those questions where it's like, well, we could spend the next 4 hours talking about the layers of truth that's found in this movie. So we'll talk about the ones that are sort of highlighted for us.
Yeah. Like the Star Wars trilogy, the original one, The Empire Strikes Back, that was the dark middle portion of the story. And the middle of the story always is the dark part. It's where evil seems to get the upper hand. It's where early in the movie, all of the characters who are untested, they're no longer living in Eden. They're no longer in the Shire. You always get a snapshot of home with all of its comfort and its peace. And then the characters are sucked into a story and they don't really know what they're getting into in the beginning. Luke Skywalker did not know, all he heard was these stories, but it's one thing to read a war story or watch a war movie. It's another thing to actually, go into battle against the Galactic Empire. And so you've got these characters who, they're just up for an adventure. And all of a sudden, at least in this movie here, in this portion, this middle segment, you see evil really getting the upper hand. And and in a way that most people don't even remember. There are stories about a war long, long ago. You get little glimpses of it, but history became legend became myth, and some things that should not have been forgotten were lost.
Yeah.
And so there's some ancient stuff that has to come back up to the surface. And so you've got this rise of evil here. And I think, for me in praying about this, and this is a movie that the Lord just speaks to me so deeply on, because I feel it's more than any other movie, this is a reflection of the time that we're in right now. And when Saruman in the beginning is really feeling bold, and he becomes kind of the puppet of Sauron, and he thinks he's his equal, but he's actually the puppet. He says the world is changing. Who now has the strength to stand against the armies of Isengard and Mordor? I think that's actually the hanging question in the rest of the movie, and the rest of the story is leaving us as the viewer to wonder who actually will have the strength to stand. And so then you begin to see the evolution of all these characters. They have to ask themselves very difficult questions. They have to come out of hiding. They have to parts of them have to die and be resurrected, or they fade into nothingness and they're of no significance whatsoever. And so I think that no matter how old you are as a man, how young you are, how childlike, there's a character in this story that you can relate to and find hope in. Because I think that really the great battle is in the face of an evil that is stronger than you thought, will you continue to hope?
Yeah. And as we were sort of going back and forth before this, that was one of the things, is how do we maintain our hope? How do we maintain our heart? In the movie, you have basically three different groups, right? You've got Pippin and Merry, who've been taken by the orcs, and they sort of end up getting lost in the forest of Fangorn and meeting Treebeard in that arc. Mm-hmm. You've got the threesome and then quad of Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, and then Gandalf pops in and out. Because spoiler alert, Gandalf's not dead. And then you've got Frodo and Sam, who are joined with Gollum / Smeagol. And I think that's the big question is, how are we going to fight against losing hope, losing our heart? And I think that the movie shows a lot of an attack in a lot of ways on your identity in a variety of ways. Like I remember early in the movie when the orcs reach the forest with Pippin and Merry, and they get kind of thrown in a pile. They said, kind of wish we hadn't volunteered for this. Kind of wish we were back home in the Shire. And as Sam will say a little later, all the great stories, the heroes have many chances to tap out, to say, I can't do it. Yeah. So the question becomes, how do we persevere is the word that seems to be appropriate in this. Because I think back even when Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli arrived at the burning heap of orc carcasses, and Gimli says, we failed them. And I just thought, for one, I thought they could not have run any faster. They could have not done any more to have rescued them. And yet to arrive at that point where they've done all they could, and he still feels like he failed them, I think I'm not even going to say I think, I know it's a feeling a lot of us men and fathers and husbands definitely have at some point in our lives, where we've done all we could, and yet we still feel like failures.
Yeah, for sure. That theme comes up time and time again with multiple characters, that the fear that a small failure somehow will be extrapolated into a much larger failure later on. But it's a story of death and resurrection over and over again. Theoden, the hobbits, something has to die in order for something greater, more praiseworthy to be born. the old has, the kid has to die for the man to be born. And I think we see that over and over again.
Yeah.
Through these stories.
Yeah. And that's an interesting point, because it many layers, in the movie, it's slightly different from the book. In the movie, Aragorn disappears and is feared dead. The hobbits, they're feared dead. Gandalf, opens the movie and everybody thinks he's dead.
Mm-hmm.
And that you see that recurrence of, I thought you were, even in the first one where Frodo got hit by the spear in the mines of Moria and they thought he was dead. And then, oh no, he has the mithril coat on. And we continue to say, that's dead. And yet it keeps proving that it's really not, as long as we can maintain hope.
Mm-hmm.
And hope can be challenging because, as you sort of mentioned with the Saruman quote, evil is rising. The days are dark. And just with that, it can be hard to maintain. But there's also an enemy. We're not alone in our heads sometimes. And in the movie, I think a great version of the enemy is played by Grima Wormtongue, who's Theoden's advisor, whispering poison. You see Theoden and he's aged and decrepit and very checked out, right? He's basically given up hope. And so he goes to Eowyn, who's Theoden's niece, and because he has designs to woo her or take her or something pretty horrible probably. But he goes with these words, and after Theodred, the son of the king, the heir, he has died, and Eomer, her brother, has been banished. And so Wormtongue takes this moment to go, in his mind, he's consoling her.
I understand. His passing is hard to accept, especially now that your brother has deserted you.
Leave me alone, Snake!
Oh, but you are alone. Who knows what you've spoken to the darkness? In the bitter watches of the night, when all your life seems to shrink, the walls of your bower closing in about you, a hutch to trammel some wild thing. So fair, so cold.
Your words are poison.
That's one of the big threats, the big lies that we have to believe, is that we are all alone. But he's even going further than that and calling her out as cold, as basically sort of like this marble statue who's lovely and cold and distant and will never really find. He's attacking her with fear, right?
Mm.
And contrast that, I think, with Frodo. He and Sam are lost in the cliffs outside Mordor. They can't get away, but they come across Gollum. And they get him to lead them. And there's a moment there where Frodo kind of questions. He pursues Gollum's identity, his heart, in a lot of ways. And he asks him who he is.
Who are you?
Mustn't ask us, not its business.
Gandalf told me you were one of the river folk.
Cold be heart and hand and bone, and cold be travellers far from home.
He said your life was a sad story.
They do not see what lies ahead when sun has failed and moon is dead.
You were not so very different from a hobbit once, were you, Smeagol?
What did you call me?
That was your name once, wasn't it? A long time ago.
And I do apologize for some of these abrupt cuts in the clips. There's some 10 seconds of silence or music. And so it's good audio. I mean, it's good visually, but it's a little bit challenging from an audio standpoint of just listening to 10 plus seconds of music. And so we see this contrast. We see Wormtongue in his interactions with Eowyn, and then previously with Eomer, he had called him, why are you bothering? Why are you basically saying you're a warmongerer? You're a malcontent. And with Eowyn, she's alone. She's cold. She's loveless. And sort of laying that identity on, and where Frodo is drawing the identity of Gollum before the ring entered his life, before he got lost under the mountains. And when I look at it, as you mentioned, the big overarching theme of evil is growing. And I love how you compared it to the Empire Strikes Back, because I thought the same thing of sort of starting in the middle and leaving us hanging at the end. But in this one, identity is so important with these. You see it in these two characters, and we'll see it as we go of how are our identities called out by both the enemy in our lives and by God.
Yes. How will our identities be called out? Absolutely. Everybody comes under accusation, and everybody also comes under invitation. And which will you pay credence to?
Oh, that's good.
And gosh, there's just so many characters. And I mean, if we were to just look at accusation versus invitation, we could probably go to every character and find the place in the story where they received accusation and invitation. That would actually be pretty fascinating. There's an easy way out for everybody. You think over the course of this story, how many times somebody had the chance to take the ring, which, if you're looking at this from a biblical mindset, the ring is the tree of knowing good and evil. It's your version of how the story should go. And you're taking the great risk of managing your own life. But it always goes back to the question, well, who are you and whose are you? And in the end, what kind of a man or what kind of a woman do you want to be? And so you've got all these voices that are entering into the story that are trying to tempt you to go one direction or the other, either to step back, because like Saruman, early on, he said, we only have to remove those who oppose us. And so, you're just going to have a whole host of evil voices that are trying to do exactly that, remove those who oppose us. But yeah, you've got these voices of invitation. I mean, I think of, you've also got Gandalf's invitation to Theoden. You might touch on this, after that incredibly powerful scene where he says, perhaps you would remember if you were to grasp your sword again. It's always an invitation to remember who you truly are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's really good. I love that comparison of accusation versus invitation, because accusation can come internally, like when Gimli says we failed them, or it could come externally, like with Wormtongue accusing him, and even Theoden in some ways, that whole the quote that we frequently use is open war is upon you, whether you would risk it or not. Theoden's response is, last I checked, I'm the king. And that whole question of what would you have me do? And the response to that and sometimes even invitation can come across as accusation. I think of Treebeard and the other Ents get together. They have their Entmoot, and they come out and tell the hobbits, we're not getting into the war. It's not our war, and you should go back to the Shire. You're too small. And interestingly enough, again, in the movie version, yeah, I'm a book nerd, so I enjoy them. I enjoy the book. I enjoy the stories. I kind of don't like what they did to Treebeard and to Faramir in the movies. I like their characters much more in the books. But Merry and Pippin have this conversation of well, maybe we should go home. Maybe we're not big enough. Maybe this isn't our fight. Maybe this isn't our war.
Maybe Treebeard's right. We don't belong here, Mary. It's too big for us. What can we do in the end? We've got the Shire. Maybe we should go home.
The fires of Isengard will spread, and the woods of Tuckborough and Buckland will burn, and all that was once green and good in this world will be gone. There won't be a Shire, Pippin.
There are consequences to our response to the accusation and invitation. Accusation wants us to check out. I had this moment over the weekend with my youngest. He's 14. He's almost 15. He's in that teenage angst, leave me alone stage. And I'm trying to engage with him. And I want him to go. We were going to try to go to a concert. And he's like, do I have to? And I told him, and I kind of reached my frustration and breaking point to a bit. And I said, I would do anything. Like, you tell me what it would take and we would do it. If the response would be, that sounds awesome, I would love to do that. He used to love skiing, and over the winter, I tried to get him to go skiing, and he's like, I don't really want to go. Trying to get him. He enjoys the shooting range, he says. Even offering, he's in driver's ed, so offering to say, hey, do you want to go practice driving? And for a long time, he didn't care. And so I was like, I feel like I'm missing my son. I feel like I'm not engaged. I don't know how to connect with you. And the temptation, the accusation, right, is you're a bad father.
Yep.
He doesn't want anything to do with you. He's happier if he doesn't ever, respond. And I've turned from offering him invitation to throwing accusation, because basically like saying your actions are making me feel like a bad father, so you're a bad son.
Yeah.
And really it's that I just want to check out because it's too hard. It hurts too much. Right? Because it's like, I'm trying and it's not, I don't see that it's working. My agreement is it's not working because I don't see that it's working. And so had this conversation with him, and who knows how it went. He was more engaged and pleasant to be around after that. But at the same time, I wonder, well, is that because I sort of manipulated that out of him, or because he's realized, oh, maybe my dad does care about me. And we get faced with that accusation and invitation. And as you mentioned, the opportunity to give up in a lot of ways in our daily lives.
Yeah. So, boy, do I know what that feels like, son and daughter. And in any given moment, in any challenging moment of parenting, there's the accusation that would have you stoop down to their level and react like a wounded dog by barking louder than them. Or there's the invitation, if you can see it, there's the invitation to be a father. There's the invitation to grow up. There's the invitation to invite your child up into an understanding that they didn't have, and to do it with a love that they probably won't see from anybody other than you. But do you have what it takes to have that conversation? It's like, until you open your mouth and those first few words come out, the chance of you seeing yourself as a good father are zero until you open your mouth and you engage, and keeping your heart in check. Yeah. So, that was a loving but firm approach. And it was far better than having done nothing, which I have been guilty of doing in the past. And we both walk out of that situation immature adolescents. We both came into it that way. We both walked out of it that way, But the hope is always another one of the lines in this movie that I could not tell you why years ago it impacted me so much was Faramir. I just love Faramir because he is the overlooked son. Yeah. He is the disappointment. He is the one that's trying so hard to earn his father's approval. And he's being coached by his older brother. And he has this line comes up that's a different way of looking than I've ever heard before, other than this movie says, to prove your quality. So even the dad mockingly says, so Faramir wants a chance to prove his quality. Mm-hmm. And that is biblically such a major theme. And that's actually what is happening to every single character in the story. Over the course of time, they may fail, get back up, fail again, but ultimately, how do they fare in the end? How will their character be proved? And of course, biblically, you see all the great characters in Scripture were proved. Jesus himself, in the wilderness. And it's great to know, actually, that the point of testing biblically is not so that God can say, aha, you're a failure.
I knew it.
Yeah, it's so that in love, he's saying, you don't know what you have inside you. And as a loving father, I'm going to put you in a position. It's the only way that you can discover who you truly are and what you truly have. Lean on me and you will literally become a new man coming out of this. Like Dan Allender, a famous author, one that I love, he said, adversity introduces us to ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing. And Faramir comes out, Boromir, the one on the outside, like King Saul in the Bible, the one who looked like the bravest, he's the one that failed.
Yeah.
He's the one that he lost, and it's Faramir. Actually, the whole story hinges upon Faramir in such an incredible way, him making the decision that he would rather be basically kicked out of the entire kingdom of Gondor that he loved than fail to do the right thing and release the hobbits with the ring of power, this incredible gift, to go and do what he knew they actually needed to do. So,
and he declared his life forfeit.
Yes.
He basically said, they need to go free, even if it costs me my life.
Mm-hmm. So powerful. Love Faramir.
Yeah. And I agree. I love Faramir, and the part that I don't like, I'm going to go story nerd on you a little bit. In the book, he never gives in to the temptation to take the ring. Mm. He has that moment of, he said, so this is my opportunity to Frodo. I can prove my quality, but very similar to Galadriel, I passed the test.
Yep.
I can see how Boromir would have fallen and gone in this way, but I have said already, I would not take it if I saw it. So I will not take it now. And I thought they did his character an injustice by changing the story in the movie a little bit so that he does give into the temptation for a period of time. I know, splitting hairs. Mm-hmm. As we go, we are faced with both accusation and invitation. And by the way, that's also very biblical because Satan is called the accuser. Mm-hmm. So if we're hearing accusation, we know where that's coming from.
Yeah.
And the Father has done, the whole purpose of Jesus was to invite us. We've been invited to the wedding feast. We've been invited home. Mm-hmm. And so we see that in Aragorn as he encounters Éowyn, as she's preparing, she is pretty good with a sword. And he asks her about what it is that she does fear.
The women of this country learned long ago. Those without swords can still die upon them. I fear neither death nor pain.
What do you fear, my lady?
A cage. To stay behind bars until use and old age accept them. And all chance of valor has gone beyond recall or desire.
You're a daughter of kings. A shield maiden of Rohan.
and he sees her, right? Sees almost beyond the fear that she has. You know, she has this longing, this desire to be a warrior. We did a podcast about the holiday a couple weeks ago and said, you know, we're stepping out into some brave new territory saying, hey, this is how women think. Mm-hmm. But I think as a man, I think a lot of women fear being put in a cage, being left behind, being in some ways not necessarily abandoned, but sort of the duty and tired and not a part of the adventure, not her warrior heart doesn't come alive. And Aragorn actually sees her, says, you're a daughter of a king. You are a shield maiden. That is not going to be your fate.
Mm-hmm.
And unlike Wormtongue, who's telling her she's all alone, here's Aragorn inviting her into the bigger story, into the battle, into the adventure.
Mm-hmm.
And it has a pretty big impact on her because as the movie goes along, she is engaging, she is laughing. She's not cold and alone, but she's a part of the bigger community. She's part of the band.
Well, she even decides that she's going to engage in some level of trickery to hide herself under armor as a man. And you wonder, you know, how much of that was because of that invitation, you know? And part of her invitation, I think, was just going along and knowing that Aragorn was there, mm-hmm. you know, so love, I think, as well, was a piece of it. And of course, she calls up one of the young little hobbits who's so childlike, you know, and she finds companionship in it. And probably, you know, the two of them, the woman and the child, were sitting on a horse together facing a battle against impossible odds. Mm-hmm. You just think how deeply we're strengthened by companionship, even when the result looks undeniable and not in your favor. To have somebody to go into battle with together is such a gift.
And that was something Theoden expressed as they were preparing for the battle at Helm's Deep, where Aragorn said, send riders, ask for help. And Theoden said, who's going to help us? The elves? The dwarves? Yeah, he's like, I'm not as lucky as you are to have an elf and a dwarf as your companion. Gondor's not going to respond. We are on our own. Mm-hmm. And yet, who shows up in the moment where even Aragorn and Legolas were despairing surviving the night, but a company of elves shows up, unhoped for, unlooked for, unasked for. And I think in our darkest moments, God does send us those allies. You know, just like you had mentioned when Éowyn goes off with Theoden's group and hides as a man, and that's in the next story. But it starts in this one because Aragorn has said, you are a shield maiden to the king. You're a shield maiden and a daughter of the king. Not to use another movie, but nobody puts baby in a corner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's a beautiful character. Éowyn is. So she's just striking, you know?
And you know, because to go off a little bit, because she does sort of fall in love with Aragorn,
mm-hmm.
whose heart is with Arwen, Elrond's daughter. And he believes her to have left, to have gone, the elves all leave go to the Grey Havens, go to their version of heaven, basically, to live everlasting. And she even chooses mortality. She chooses to stay with Aragorn. You know, I thought it was interesting that conversation between Arwen and Elrond, where Elrond, her father, says, even if it goes as planned, even if the best thing happens and Aragorn wins and he becomes king, he will die and you will not. And you will suffer grief that is indescribable. And yet she still chooses, you know, and in a way that's accusation. That's preying on fear. but the invitation to love and engage in love despite what might happen. I think it's an interesting contrast.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As the story goes, we're going back to Fred and Sam and Smeagol / Gollum. And there's a moment where Smeagol and Gollum have a conversation. Yes, they're the same character, but as we all know, we are of two different minds, of two different hearts. And there's the part that is responding to invitation, and there's the part that responds to accusation. And Paul talks about it in Romans 7. There's a part of me that does what I don't want to do. It doesn't do the things I don't want to do. And what a miserable man am I. And in this clip, we're going to see what a miserable man or thing, person, being Gollum actually is.
Must have the precious. They stole it from us. Sneaky little hobbitses. Wicked, tricksy, false. No, master. Yes, precious, false. They will cheat you, hurt you, lie. Master's my friend. You don't have any friends. Nobody likes you.
Not listening. Not listening.
You're a liar. And a thief. No.
Murderer.
Go away. Go away! I hate you. I hate you. Where would you be without me? Ellen. I saved us. It was me. We survived because of me. Not anymore. What did you say? Master looks after us now. We don't need you. What? Leave now and never come back. No! Leave now and never come back! Leave now and never come back!
We told him to go away. And away he goes, precious. Gone! Smeagol is free!
And I think we could probably do a whole hour on the depth of that clip.
Yeah, it's pretty disturbing and familiar at the same time.
Because you, on the one hand, you've got the Gollum side, very accusatory, sneaking, lying, you're a thief, murderer. And we all have that. We are very familiar with that voice in our heads that say, oh, you've done this thing and you could never not have done that. On the other hand, we do have our true self, our true identity that says, no, that's not who I am anymore. And in a sense, Smeagol crucifies his old self because he doesn't need it anymore.
Yeah. He's also been invited by Frodo to remember who he truly is. Mm-hmm. And he's actually got a living picture in Frodo every step of the journey of what it looks like. I mean, he's been alone also for a long, long time. He's actually in community right now, and he wants to love Master.
Yeah.
But the orphan heart says you can't trust anybody. He's tricksy. He's false. I mean, those two words, they're so awkward, but he says it over and over again. He's tricksy. He's false. I told you he would lie to you. And yeah, he's got an enemy living inside his head. and it does need to be crucified, and it comes up at these opportune times. And so you kind of wonder at this point in the story whether when Smeagol tells Gollum, to go to hell and he's free of it, what will be the invitation or the accusation that gives invitation to Gollum to come back and haunt him again. It just takes another occurrence, which happened later on in the story when Gollum was actually about to be killed, and he misinterpreted Frodo saving his life as betrayal.
Right.
But there was the enemy just waiting for the opportunity to twist the truth again.
Yeah.
And turn him against Frodo, the only one who believed in him at all. Yeah.
One of the reasons Frodo was so passionate and caring for Gollum / Smeagol is because he was afraid of becoming him.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I love what you just said there about he misinterpreted Frodo's reaction. Frodo saved Smeagol's life, and Smeagol saw it as a betrayal. And that allowed Gollum to come back and see, we told you he was false. We told you he was tricksy. We told you he couldn't be trusted. And how often do we make that agreement about our Father? When God does something that we misinterpret as tricksy and false, when it actually saved us from a fate much worse.
It's so true. It's so true. And I think with maturity, we're able to recognize the voice of the accuser as being a lie and inconsistent with our true nature. It's easier to dismiss. Not that life gets any easier, because I think, coming from a biblical kingdom-hearted mindset, which you and I have, our hearts long for our version of the Shire. And we want, we want to get there. And less, I think, do I deal with the false self. At least I think. It gets much more complicated, much more complex, and it hides its face a lot more deceptively than it did several years ago when I began recognizing, the Gollum voice inside my head.
It has a taste to it. Has a smell.
It does. It does. And then when you hear it, it doesn't sit. It doesn't leave you with peace. It saps your strength as opposed to offering strength when you obey that voice. Yeah, for sure.
Well, and going back to that resurrection theme, it makes whatever you're facing, it feels like death.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was saying with my son a little bit, like it felt like death. It felt like I was screwing up. It felt like accusation. And so being able to respond to invitation, as you mentioned, we have an invitation in those moments, even when we're being accused, of how are we going to respond? Mm-hmm. Am I going to give up and just check out, and like I could have done with my son? Am I going to yell at him and try to manipulate him to be good? It's in good manners to answer your phone when I call or to respond to a text. And as a father, it's really easy to manipulate your kids to do what you want them to, mostly to soothe your own aching heart. At least it's a pretty, I've gone down that slippery slope. Or in those moments of accusation where I am feeling pressure because I wasn't engaging with my son and I don't know what I'm doing. And I was like, well, should I make him, get off the phone and turn off the TV when I don't have a better option available for him in this moment? And that pressure, it's like, well, how do I engage? Because I think we tend to react and to just kind of flail about in an effort to soothe the pain of the accusation, instead of saying, how can I? Because there's a lot of moments that we face where the answer that we have is, I can't do this anymore. And in the movie, Frodo feels that. He's under the burden. He's under the weight of the ring. And he says, I mean, I'm pretty sure that's what he actually says is, I can't do this anymore.
I can't do this, Sam. I know. It's all wrong. By rights, we shouldn't even be here. But we are. It's like in the great stories, Mr. Frodo. The ones that really mattered. Full of darkness and danger they were. And sometimes you didn't want to know the end. Because how could the end be happy? How could the world go back to the way it was when so much bad had happened? But in the end, it's only a passing thing. This shadow. Even darkness must pass. A new day will come. And when the sun shines, it'll shine out the clearer. Those were the stories that stayed with you. That meant something. Even if you were too small to understand why. But I think, Mr. Frodo, I do understand. I know now. Folk in those stories had lots of chances of turning back, only they didn't. They kept going. Because they were holding on to something.
And the question becomes, what do you hold on to? I love that clip. I found myself getting a little emotional just listening to it because he's talking about how dark the world is when it seems like there's no hope. And going back to the beginning, that's what we talked about is evil was growing and it feels like it's threatening to overwhelm us. And how do you maintain hope and how do you maintain heart in the face of such darkness? Because we do have a choice ultimately. We have a choice to listen to accusation or a choice to listen to invitation.
Something this story does so brilliantly is it shows us how important it is to face reality and to choose what kind of man we're going to be. We can either choose comfort or we can choose significance. We can either choose, I would want to say comfort again. We could either choose reality along with all of the pain and reorientation and reinterpretation that may be required of us. Will I choose the truth or will I hide and pretend? There's still tons of people back in the Shire who know absolutely nothing about it, but there are at least 4 little childlike human beings that have chosen to engage in a story that they're completely unprepared for. And over the course of the story, they are equipped to take a place. They weren't prepared from the beginning. None of them were. They were equipped along the way to take their place in it. And I sure hope that I find a place that will at least be significant to those around me when my story is someday told, and you talked about children a good bit. I have a sensitivity about my kids sitting around the television because I don't want them, in the same way that I don't want me, to look back and see any wasted time on Earth, that I left my mark, not in the hearts of other people, but on my couch because I was watching TV.
Yeah. And the thing to remember, Gandalf had a quote that's early in the book. And because we think about these actions, Merry and Pippin both had we're so small, we don't have an outcome. We should just go back to the Shire. That moment where they said, I wish we didn't leave. But you look back into the events that happened when Boromir kind of broke bad and tried to grab the ring, and he ended up dying. But then that's how Merry and Pippin got taken. And then Merry and Pippin moving very quick to the edges of the Fanghorn Forest. And Gandalf says, as he knows that they're in Fanghorn, he says, so between them, our enemies have contrived only to bring Merry and Pippin to Fanghorn, where otherwise they would have never come at all. I don't know how this war ends if the Ents don't get involved. The war with Saruman would have been much more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason that Treebeard enters the battle is because these two hobbits, halflings, a species Treebeard didn't even know existed, showed up at his doorstep and told them, hey, this is going on. Showed them the effects of the battle. And though small though they were, they had a major impact in ways that, they didn't wish to get captured by the orcs. They didn't wish for Boromir to die or for Boromir to even give into the temptation of the ring. But it was all used in the greater plan to bring them to the Fanghorn Forest. And our choice, we have a choice to give up or to keep persevering. And there's this about a 2-page quote from Sam from where he sort of expounds on that of the great stories. And he says, if they give up, we don't know their story because there's not a great story to say, yeah, it got hard and we gave up.
Mm-hmm.
But what makes a great story is in that darkest moment, we held on to the light, knowing that the shadow is a passing thing and that dawn is coming. The true king is returning. And we can look forward to that hope. And knowing that the battle is still being fought. And ultimately, we know who wins.
So one huge advantage that we have that they didn't have in the story.
Yeah.
It makes me feel, even as I look at the darkness of that story and my heart's so wrapped up in it, and I feel so much like their story is my story. I grieve for them because they don't have an eternal Shire to go back to. And it's amazing how much hope they receive from thinking back on the Shire throughout the story, and how much hope we have by looking forward to the coming kingdom. It's such an amazing story and such an amazing chapter in this great story.
Well, and it's a reminder of, in the midst of the battle, how do we continue? How do we keep heart? It's we look forward to the hope that we have in Christ and the hope of heaven. And another line from Faramir, who's our guy, right? Because he said, for myself, I would see the white tree in flower again in the courts of the kings, and the silver crown return, and Minas Tirith in peace. Minas Aenir again as of old, full of light, high and fair, beautiful as a queen among other queens. War must be, while we defend our lives against a destroyer who would devour all. But I do not love the bright sword for its sharpness, nor the arrow for its swiftness, nor the warrior for his glory. I love only that which they defend. The city of the men of Numenor, and I would have her loved for her memory, her ancientry, her beauty, and her present wisdom. Because we don't fight in vain. We don't fight to fight. The warrior mentality, we don't look at battle scenes because we love battle. But we love what we're fighting for, and it's worth fighting for, and it's worth persevering for. And like you mentioned, it's what we're called to do. We're not called to leave a mark on our couch. We're called to leave a mark on the hearts of those around us. And are we inviting them, or do we sometimes have the voice of the accuser?
We all have a desire to become a particular kind of man. We all have a fear, but we cannot become that kind of man. And we all have a reaction to it, either to move toward it or to move away from it. Character after character is an invitation for me to get up off my couch and say, I don't care how ill-equipped I am. I want to be that kind of man. Gives myself to something even when I don't know the outcome. You know, despite what I actually accomplish in life, whether I build a company to leave to my children or not, I think the greater gift is that my children see me as a man who pursues something with his whole heart, who loves with his whole heart. And it's not about what I accomplish. I mean, like that's part of hope. The hope, I can either hope to accomplish something or leave something or have a particular impact on the world, or I can hope to become a better man.
Right.
And one of them is totally attainable and the other one may not be, you know?
Yeah.
So it really is important what our target is. It really is important what we're hoping in. And I'm hoping that when I pass, my children will look at me and say, he was brave. He was kind. He was loving. When he was scared, he did not back down. When he made mistakes, he asked forgiveness. And he made amends, and he was perfectible. And he became the kind of man that I want to be in terms of those things, not that he was a multi-million-dollar corporate CEO who drove a fancy car. That's crap. All of that's crap.
It doesn't last.
None of it. And it doesn't make anybody happy, no. You know? We know that. Unfortunately, we have to at least have a season where we pursue that to come to that conclusion on our own. But in the end, our lives are most touched by the people who love us well. I guess just one last picture that I have not been able to get out of my head is calling out the best in us. There's a moment right before the Battle of Helm's Deep where there's a little boy who's never held a sword, obviously. Yeah. And he's still got the voice of a girl. And Aragorn is frustrated and he's sitting on the steps and he's looking at this terrified kid who's been handed this sword. And he calls the boy over and the boy says, we're told that it's hopeless, that there's no way that we can do anything. And with just this brilliance and with this maturity of a man, he sees the scared kid. He overcomes his own fear, crawls out of his own hole of depression, and says, I have a higher calling in this moment than to feel bad for myself. And I first asks, what is your name, son? And then he says, let me see your sword. He looks at it. He swings it so that the kid feels the power in Aragorn's hands, and he can hear it going whoosh, 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 whoosh. And he says, this is a good sword. In other words, you have what you need. And he says, there's always hope. And that is such a beautiful picture of masculinity, denying itself and offering it to the young boy. And that's what I want to do with my life, you know. And that's why he makes a good king. In the end, yeah, spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. That'll come next time. Mm-hmm. So this has been Paul McDonald and Jay Heck talking about the two towers and accusation versus invitation into who we are becoming. And I hope you join us next time as we talk about the Return of the King here on the Men at the Movies podcast.
Something inside has been awakened. I can no longer be who I was before. But if I am no longer who I was, who am I to be?